My first weekend of school, I ended up in a fight with my roommate. We didn't agree. We end up on the ground. Another friend pulls me off of him, and that was pretty much it for me. I withdrew from all my classes that Monday and went home, and at that point I had nothing. And I was strongly contemplating suicide at that point because I had no hope of transitioning to an adult in any sort of way.
Let's be honest about recovery.
The rewards, the challenges.
Let's talk about our failures.
We are flawed people, after all.
Let's challenge the stigmas that weigh us down.
Because while most of us are looked at,
Few of us are seen.
Let's talk about addiction.
And how Christ overcomes our weaknesses.
Because we are loved.
because we are
We
loved.
are
Because
loved.
we are loved.
We are loved.
We are
Because
loved.
we are loved.
I'm Warren Dedeaux, and my story really starts with the fact that I never had a father in my life from birth, and I also lost my mother at a very young age, tragically, in a car accident, and it really spiraled me through high school on a downward trend with substance abuse and near death through suicide, and eventually the Lord intersected my life and brought me back to a place where I understood the gospel. He saved me, changed everything, gave me a purpose, and I'm excited to be here to tell you about it.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Jesus Loves Addicts. Once again, we're really happy that you're with us. And today we are privileged to have Warren Dedeaux with us. And I am actually going to read something. I'm going to put on my old man glasses and read a little bit of his bio for a purpose. And I will say something to this in a minute. Warren is a husband of 19 years. He's got three daughters. I'm sorry, two in high school and one in her last year of grade school. He's got a bachelor's degree in psychology, a master's in business, a Juris Doctorate, which I believe is like a pre-law. Is that correct?
It's law, it's a doctorate.
Yeah, okay. He's almost completed a Master of Theological Studies. He's an owner and partner and general counsel for a number of companies that focus on commercial real estate development, and he manages commercial real estate development and management, as well as business development. And then he serves as executive director for a nonprofit in the Gulf Coast called Missio Dei, right? Latin for mission of God. Thank you for including the definition there. But the reason I wanted to read this is because, oftentimes in certain circles, there's this perception that addicts are folks without goals, without ambition, without motivation. And I think anybody hearing Warren's bio would be hard-pressed to say that this man has no ambition, no motivation, and no goals. And so what this really points out to us is, once again, addiction is without boundaries. It doesn't seek out the stereotype. It is an equal opportunity illness. And so I'm looking forward to hearing a bit more about that. Warren, can you kind of tell us where this journey for you began?
I guess really it starts with the fact that I never knew my father. When I was born, he was out of the picture. And so the first half of my, childhood, you would call it, I was raised by a single mother. And then pretty close to the halfway mark, around 11, I had just turned 12. I had found out that my mom was killed in a tragic car accident. And so basically I was left without parents from that point forward.
You said you found out. You were living with your mom, right?
No,
or not?
No.
Okay.
So actually, there was a little stint. My mom was briefly married to a guy for 1 year that worked offshore. So he wasn't around a whole lot, wasn't a big part of my life. But they were in the middle of a divorce. And so I had moved in with my mom's parents, my grandparents on her side. And the goal was for it to be just a couple months long while she worked through that. And then I was going to move back with her. And so it was during that 2-month period. And so when I say I found out, I was actually at my grandparents one morning and woke up to a house full of people and That's how I found out. So,
And you were how old when you lost your father?
My father or my mother?
Your father.
Oh, I never knew my father.
Never knew your father. And then at
never knew my
11,
father.
12, you lose your mother.
I just turned 12. Yeah.
So probably a question that may not even need to be asked, but so how did this affect you at that young age, right?
Well, it's funny, at that age, you don't really know. And I think, after the Lord intervened in my life and, saved me, so to speak, which, I think we'll have the opportunity to get into more what that looks like, saved me from where I had gotten to, and how my life turned. I didn't really start understanding how it affected me and how it correlated to the path that I went down until after that turn. Yeah. So it was a lot later in life that I started realizing that. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
So at that time, you were already staying with your grandparents?
Yes.
You just
and I just
remained there?
continued to live with my grandparents. And the short answer is, even though I didn't know it at the time, really is it created a lot of insecurity in my life. I was just going into middle school age where kids already deal with that a lot and they're trying to find themselves and, and that type of thing. So I dealt with a lot of insecurity, a lot of fear, a lot of depression, sadness, and just anxiety in general about how I fit in to a society of peers that, most of whom had not really experienced the things that I had experienced and had normal families.
Had parents.
Yes. Yeah.
And all of those emotions, as you make mention wisely, is that kids kind of go through that naturally. But then here are these traumatic events for you that kind of supercharge all this. What was life like in your grandparents' house? Just briefly, was that a good home? Was it
not terrible. How do you define that, right? For me, they were there. And I had, between my grandfather and his living and then my mom had left her Social Security I had the benefit of till I turned of a certain age since I was so young. So monetarily, I would say my needs were met. And my grandfather was a creature of habit. I mean, he was going to be home every single night at the same time and leave home every single morning at the same time. But the dynamics, basically parenting wise, they were not there. I mean, right. I basically raised myself from a social aspect. From that point forward, I had no rules and regulations. I came and went as I pleased, and combined with insecurity and all the other stuff, it just basically pushed me out onto the street and, I raised myself among my peers.
Yeah.
So you gravitate towards the ones you feel more love towards, right? And the ones who are looking to give it. And naturally, those tend to be the circles, I think, where substance use comes more into play.
Sure.
And so I started drinking alcohol, and I think I was even tobacco was even early, even before my mom passed. But alcohol in 7th grade pretty much I started becoming semi-routine, mostly social settings at that point, not like every night or anything, but I was introduced to it, and it really just escalated from there.
It's hard to imagine a lot of social scenarios for a 7-year-old or a 7th grader that would include alcohol, but it's really commonplace now, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, it was not uncommon at all to have parents either just not involved in their kids' lives.
Or parents that let them drink.
Yeah, exactly. Or they would go out themselves and leave the house to the kids, or go out of town for the weekend and leave the house to the kids. Or we had other spots just in public. We'd find woods that led down to a gazebo somewhere on the bayou, and we'd all pull our trucks back there and have a party there or whatever. You just find places you can, mingle. And then between the whole group, you have older cousins that are willing to buy you alcohol, or maybe you have some that just look older and can go into certain stores that they know are lenient, or
there were,
you find ways to get it.
There were stores that definitely didn't card.
Yeah. Oh. Well, so this tragedy happens at 11,
so it's right at 12,
right at 12. And so how does that then, because clearly this is a defining moment, how then does that kind of lead you into this next chapter or contribute?
Yeah. So, basically, like I said, I started raising myself. And kind of, I think more of where I'll focus kind of now is how it transitioned really from just socially drinking at middle school parties and into kind of that next phase of it, if you will, and what it led to after that and how it led to it. So I had an older cousin who was gotten very involved in my life after my mom died. And his brother is actually a multi-time attendant here at the Home of Grace. His Henry Dedeaux. My cousin that I'm referring to is John Dedeaux. We called him John Blue. And so John Blue was in my life in a very rich and deep way, meant a lot to me from like 12 to about 16. And you say, why for only 4 years? Well, I'll help you understand. So he lived in Florida. He was single at the time, but he was in his early 30s. And I was just a young teenage kid. And but he would come into town, and his mom and my grandmother were sister-in-laws and very, very close.
Okay.
So he would come into town and stay with his mom. And every time he was in town, we would get together. And this was the normal course of business. And he was his message to me was always play hard. That's okay. You know, like, yeah, you drink and, smoke weed and whatever. And I'll get into the whatever. But it was also, if you're going to do that, though, find a purpose and work hard.
Work hard, play hard. Yeah.
Work hard, play hard type of mentality. That was what he instilled in me. And, well, when he was 14, he got married. I was the best man in his wedding. I was not working very hard.
And you
yet.
were how old?
This was like 12 to like 15.
Okay. So he was not much older than you.
Yeah.
Okay.
By the time I was 14, that's when he was getting married. I was the best man in his wedding at 14 years old. And then he and his wife ended up moving back to the coast when I was in my 10th grade year. So I'm right at 15 years old. He moves back here. And he had actually, he was an electronic music DJ in Florida. So he played at like events called raves.
Yeah.
I don't know if people even know what those are anymore, but he did raves and clubs. That was his scene in Florida. And so he had introduced me to electronic music at a pretty early age. I brought my first ecstasy pill I took when I was in 9th grade. He brought it to me.
So he also played hard.
Yes, he played hard, yes.
He was teaching you what he did.
Kind of, yeah. I mean, he was just himself, and but he was an important part of my life. I don't know if that makes sense.
Let me ask it does. Let me ask something about that, because it's interesting, right? I mean, you're describing this gentleman who played hard, right? And probably worked hard. Maybe not a traditional father figure, but in the absence of one in your life, did he kind of fill that place for a short time?
Yes. Maybe more like older brother, but because I didn't have a father, it's not like he was just a couple years older. He was in his early 30s and I was 14, 15.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So he was an adult,
but
not quite as old as my mom would have been or my parents would have been a little bit younger. He was my mom's younger cousin. So he was my second cousin.
Okay.
But there was a bit of an undertone for your bonding with him, right? There was that male figure. I got you. Okay.
Yes.
Well, male figure, and also he was intentional. And your grandparents let you do what you want. You didn't know your dad. Your mom was gone. And he was intentional. Even if it wasn't all the time, he was a constant for you.
Yeah. And so I have him kind of progressing my mindset towards electronic music and I don't know if you call maybe designer drugs or whatever.
Yeah.
The stuff that those type, that crowd, almost kind of maybe like a Widespread Panic or a Grateful Dead, those type of uses for drugs, where you're trying to create kind of this love and peace, LSD, ecstasy, those types of things. And so some of my friends were already going and down the path of cannabis. So I was starting to see that through my friend groups, but John was the first one to really introduce anything harder than that to me. And so I had taken my first ecstasy pill before even my friends or anybody kind of started seeing it come around. And so my 10th grade year, John and his wife moved down here, and I was doing very bad in school. And I found out I'd missed so many days I was going to have to repeat a semester. I was at Gulfport High at the time. And so I dropped out for this semester with the goal of going to work with my cousin, doing construction for the rest of the school year through the summer, and then getting back in and trying to do better. That was my goal at the time. And about halfway through that summer, I was 16, summer after my first 10th grade year. I woke up one morning at a friend's house, got in my car to leave and checked my voicemail and found out that John Blue had been hit by a train and killed. Yeah. So that was another tragic loss for me at 16 years old that I think just, continued that pain in my life,
Absolutely.
and the trauma and, and had introduced me to this world that that next school year I would end up launching into in a big way personally.
Right.
And so when John died, that work hard, play hard mentality, my grandparents had been trying to offer me to go to a boarding school in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi called St. Stanislaus. Mm-hmm. And so I had rejected them and they weren't forcing me to go, but I had that Social Security benefit. They were offering to let me use it to go. Well, after John died, I had just failed 10th grade and was going to have to repeat. Maybe it was John's voice in my head or whatever, thinking, okay, I'm going down this path of playing hard, but if I'm going to have any sort of balance to that, I probably need to take my grandparents up on that offer. And so I ended up at St. Stanislaus.
And work hard too.
Repeating 10th grade. And the ironic thing about that is it's not just that I moved to Stanislaus, but it's that I had to repeat a grade because of who I met in the dorm. And if I would have gone in 11th grade, I wouldn't have become friends with this guy. But there was a guy named Philip Marino who was also an electronic music DJ in New Orleans. And not only was he just a DJ, but he was a duo with this other guy named Dan. And Dan ended up being partners in this organization called Freebase Society in New Orleans. And they threw raves at a place called the State Palace Theater. So that led me down a path of like, wow, John, my cousin, whet my appetite for this music and this world and all this. And now I have this roommate at school who can basically open the floodgates in my life to get into this world and experience it like my cousin did, who I just lost tragically.
Right.
And so this launched me into 3 years of basically the New Orleans rave scene. And that opened the door to it pretty much opened the floodgates to all drugs, not only doing them consistently, but also dealing them. And all kinds of dangers in retrospect that come along with that.
So we grew up with what we know to be a rave, but just for anybody listening, a rave is basically just a no-holds-barred, all-out party, and typically lots of designer drugs involved and things like that, right?
Yes. Okay. So there's multiple stages, typically in a large building or on a large property. Every stage has different styles of music and DJs playing very loud music. The lighting shows and things like that are very dynamic. And so the combination of the designer drugs along with that atmosphere.
It's a sensory overload.
Yeah, and it became an addiction.
Yeah.
Really
I've
overall.
Heard that it was an addiction for many. And also with the State Palace area, even the police didn't get involved. Why? Because they knew where everybody was. And they would even make sure they stayed in there. So you were good. You were free to do what you wanted to do. And if that wasn't enough, then they also had an after party at the Audubon Park. And so everybody just went there, but they didn't worry, which I always found was weird, but they didn't because they knew where everybody was. So you had license to do whatever.
A little bit. Yeah. It was like that for several years. Especially at the local police level. But there's some interesting things that I realized after the fact and to me, I like illustrating this side of it because for me, it illustrates God's grace in my life. And the DEA was actually very involved, but they were using this law that was created at the time to try to pin everything that was going on inside the State Palace Theater on the guy who was throwing the parties. His name was Donnie. And so the DEA was actually, I found out much later, they were very present in State Palace Theater for several years. And to me, that's just how close was I potentially being a part of that, or how easy would it have been, for me to end up in jail for a long stint of my life, prison, and in Louisiana, may have been Angola, which for a guy like me would not have been good. Right. I'm not a hard, self-defense kind of guy. I'm a lover, you're right, not a fighter. So, just God's grace in my life and many situations where I could have ended up dead also. It was a long season that led to some very dark places for me.
I'd like to take a moment to recognize a major podcast sponsor. Today's episode is brought to you by America's Thrift Stores, your go-to option for decluttering and giving back. You have a closet bursting at the seams or a garage that's seen better days? We've got the perfect solution for you.
That's right. America's Thrift Stores makes it easy to clear out the clutter and make a positive impact in your community. Whether you are cleaning out your wardrobe, downsizing your living space, or just looking to give back, America's Thrift Stores has you covered.
And here's the best part. You've got options. Schedule a hassle-free home pickup, drop off your items at one of their convenient donation sites, or swing by an America's Thrift Store to donate in person. No matter which way you choose, you're making a difference.
Every donation you make to America's Thrift Stores directly benefits charities in your area, such as the Home of Grace and other fantastic organizations dedicated to helping those in need.
For example, donations made to America's Thrift Stores in southern Mississippi help the Home of Grace provide support and assistance to individuals facing drug and alcohol addiction. Your contributions make a real impact on their mission to provide freedom from addiction through Christ-centered recovery. So, not only are you decluttering your life, but you're also helping build a stronger and more supportive community.
It's truly a double blessing, so what are you waiting for? Clean out that closet, clear out that garage, and make a positive difference in your community by donating to America's Thrift Stores.
Visit America's Thrift Stores online to schedule a home pickup, locate a donation site near you, or get directions to one of their store locations.
America's Thrift Stores, where giving back never goes out of style.
Sure.
So you said you got into this scene. Did you become a DJ? Were you working? So you were working.
I bought turntables, and my roommate Phil at Stanislaus is basically like, look, you buy turntables, I'll teach you how to mix music. You pick the styles you like. I'll teach you how to mix. We'll use your turntables at State Palace for the parties, and you can basically have full access.
And so backstage, I imagine there's a little bit of celebrity that comes with this, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So you're riding high at this point, not just
and then all my friends from the
but
coast, I was providing access into the, underbelly of that scene for all of my friends now through my friend Phil.
Yeah.
So it was a little bit like that for sure.
You're the man to know to some,
for people from the coast. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, was your own addiction at this point increasing?
Oh yeah. Yeah. It was pretty much every weekend. And whatever we could get our hands on for so long. And then like all summer long, anytime I was home from school, it was what can we get our hands on and how can we get back to that state of euphoria, basically.
You were still able to flip that switch off when you were at school though?
That's exactly what I was fixing to ask.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting. That's a tough dynamic sometimes.
Yeah.
Did you ever lose that control?
One time I did. I don't know how I made it through the day. I ended up taking some LSD before school one morning, and but that was it. I mean, for the most part, I had that mentality. I was there for a purpose. I wasn't there because I was sent there. After school, I wasn't the guy skipping off campus trying to smoke cigarettes or like I was the guy that had found a good group of guys, and we were either playing tennis, intramurals, working out. So I took advantage of the school week.
So there was a bit of a Jekyll and Hyde thing going on for you.
And I think it came from John.
Yeah.
The work hard, play hard, losing him, and then this combination of having a good environment where I can work hard during the week, but also now meeting people who launched me into basically the depths of the party scene on the weekends. So
I think it also has to do with the type of drugs. There's not, if we're looking at some of the ones, if it was, Xanax or opiates, there's that physical. So you would have to do it. But when it's the designer, when it's LSD and ecstasy, that can be a weekend.
Yeah. And we had opiates around, but for me, for my crowd, it just wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
Like it was. And I probably, if I thought about it, I could probably think of a couple friends that having opiates involved led them down that path.
Yeah.
You know, but for me, I think having Stanislaus was a little bit of that safe haven to keep me from going there fully.
Right.
You know, with some of those more addictive drugs, but they were definitely there and definitely a part of it. Somehow I just kind of, and at least until I got out of Stanislaus, you know, but really, I don't know, even going into college, like I couldn't be happy without them.
Yeah.
But also I could still find my purpose during the day. Like even in college, like I did fine. And it was that college prep at Stanislaus that helped me find that balance. So, you know, I made honor society my freshman year of college, you know, but I still was not happy socially and had no hope to do anything with that. And without substance use.
Right.
The second school was out, it was, where can I find cannabis? Right. What are we going to find for this weekend?
Yeah.
And I could not be happy without that, even though somehow I had this weird discipline to do good in school.
Yeah.
You know,
You said you weren't happy socially. Do you feel like you had, like, was it without the substances? Was there some sort of social anxiety? I mean, did you feel awkward in social situations? Were you self-medicating that?
yeah. I mean, I think that's a big part of it. I think also too, like school was not a career, right? Doesn't have the pressures of adulthood yet.
Right.
And I think for me, like just learning some work ethic got me through school very well. But, you know, another side of this story, going back to being raised by my grandmother and how that dynamic affected me, my grandmother was a very big enabler. And my mom and two of her other siblings, so it was my mom and three siblings. They were all girls. And my mom and two of the other four, so three of the four, either ended up dead or never doing anything with their life. All the way down to my grandparents' death, they were at war with each other, and a couple of them still don't like each other. You know, they're always fighting with each other. They were always fighting with each other over, you know, who was going to be closest to my grandma and who that, you know, and my grandmother played into it.
Yeah.
So it was a very, very unhealthy dynamic. And, you know, it just, that enabling mentality, I just didn't have anyone in my life to help me have hope for a transition from school to adulthood. You know, I had nobody as an example. By the time I got there, my grandfather was pretty much passing away. He had cancer. And really, even the few years I did have him, I mean, he was out of the game. You know, he was retired, and he went through some things with eminent domain and stuff that, you know, but just basically he wasn't in the workplace anymore. And so I just didn't have anybody in my family, you know, to help me make that transition. My grandmother probably actually did the opposite of helping me go in that direction, even subconsciously. You know, I don't think she would have intentionally harmed me from trying to be successful. She just didn't know any other way.
Yeah.
You know,
She'd been doing it.
Exactly. And that's just who she was. And so I had that going against me. And so I think the continued substance abuse and depression and fear and all of those things and anxiety wasn't just about social anxiety per se. It was about who I was becoming in society and this fear that I wasn't going to become anyone.
Yeah.
Right. And not that I have to be someone, but like I didn't even have hope to have a career. Like because I had these aunts in my life that never did anything with their life. You know, and they did things like fight over who was going to get what. And you know, it's like this kind of entitlement mentality. And that was the only example I had, and only the people that I had in my life that would normally play that role of helping you make those leaps in your life. They don't know how to help me make that leap. They never made the leap for themselves.
You know, you said not that I have to be somebody. But I wonder if maybe there wasn't some underlying feeling that way, right? You're describing a scenario in your home life and everything else where it would be easy to see somebody coming out of that with what we call a very performance-based kind of idea of acceptance, right? I'm only as good as the last thing I've done. And that might even be internal, right? I mean, I'm just giving you my perception. You tell me if this is if this feels right or wrong, but there was nobody to give you accolades, right? I mean, you lived in a kind of a very dynamically rich home of dysfunction, and you lost your parents. You're seeing people in your family, on your own words, not become anything. I could easily see you having this internal drive and judging yourself on finish lines. Does that feel accurate at all to you? I mean, is there some of that? And
I don't think it's there as strong today.
Okay.
But I think early on,
yeah,
like even after, so I guess just to kind of segue here, because I think that's where we're going. Basically, I had moved to Vegas my sophomore year of college with an aunt and uncle, trying to get away from substances and old friends.
That's where you want to get away from substances, Vegas.
Well, I know. Everybody says that. Everyone's like, what? You went to Vegas to do that? But I lived in the suburb. I lived with family. I worked with my aunt in her business, and I went to UNLV for that year. And the long and short of it is that's right. You know, I did tone it down. I was able to tone everything down, but I was just turning 21. You know, and so now I can go buy alcohol myself.
Yeah.
You know, and so the reality is while I did tone it back from all of the harder stuff, I still couldn't be happy. I was depressed. I needed alcohol. I needed tobacco. Slowly but surely through the music scene. Oh yeah, I can get you some weed, you know, and I got some friends that have some Valium right now or some whatever.
Yeah.
You know, so it toned down from the harder things like meth and LSD and all of that. But that's all irrelevant to me, other than maybe danger of use, which today everything's so dangerous. You don't, right. I mean, I would hate to know my kids are getting anything off the street because of all the weird, you know, people putting fentanyl or whatever all this stuff is now. It wasn't like that back then. Mm-hmm. Mostly, you know, you knew what you were getting and it wasn't that level of danger, but
and you knew who you were getting it from for the most part.
Yes. The point is though, it's not about how heavy of what you're using. Mm-hmm. It's about whether you can find purpose and joy and happiness in your life without substances. And that's what I couldn't do.
Right.
And so going to Vegas only helped me come that much closer to that reality of like, okay, now I've moved halfway across the country. I've been going to church by myself every Sunday. I've been praying, you know, and I started that before I went to Vegas, you know, so that whole year, probably 15 months straight, you know, I was going to Catholic church by myself. And every week, I went every single week. And man, I got to the end of that period and nothing was changing. I was even more depressed than ever because nothing was changing. And I still had all the things in my life that, you know, substances, and it wasn't just substance addiction. Yeah. You know, for me, it was, you know, I got introduced to sexual garbage at a very early age.
Sure.
You know, and I think had a lot to do with me never having hope of getting married.
Yeah. Because
I knew the view that I grew up learning of and the view that I had of women was not good.
Yeah.
You know, so it's all of that stuff was still playing a heavy role. I was depressed as ever and really, really, really getting hopeless. And that's where it got me close to suicide.
Dragging this junk pile behind you, right? Can we call it? And you try to kind of heap religion on top of that, right? You're trying to put a blanket of religion over that. Would that be kind of fair to say? And so it feels like, so there's this kind of conflict in your life, right? These Jekyll and Hyde pieces to you.
Yeah.
Was this the beginning of a spiritual journey for you, or had this started a long time ago?
Yeah, I would say, because I was face to face with death at this point. You know, so the real...
Literally at some point.
Yeah, now I went to Catholic school, like I said. So, I mean, I was but early on, I was a part of a Baptist church with my mom for a very, very short stint.
Yeah.
Other than that, you didn't hear me mention really anything about growing up in church or any sort of denominational background or anything like that. I just didn't have that in my life growing up. I had the Catholic services in school. So that's the only thing I knew.
Yeah.
That's why I started going to Catholic church when I did start going in my college years, is because that's what I knew from high school.
Yeah.
You know, so, but yeah, that after a year of that, I moved back to Oxford, re-enrolled at Ole Miss. And my first weekend of school, I ended up in a fight with my roommate where we lived in the little neighborhood. There was a block party going on. He and his girlfriend wanted to go in and go to bed. And I was like, no, you need to go to her apartment if you want to do that. There's a block party going on here. I'm coming in and getting on the turntables. We didn't agree. We end up on the ground. Another friend pulls me off of him, pulls me outside trying to calm me down. We end up falling off the sidewalk. I bust my knees all up. And that was pretty much it for me. I withdrew from all my classes that Monday and went home. And at that point, I had nothing. And I was strongly contemplating suicide at that point because I had no hope of transitioning to an adult in any sort of way. From a marriage standpoint, I was pretty sure from using so many substances from a young age, I was going to be sterile and not be able to have kids. And because of my grandmother, the enabling and not having anybody in my family be an example of growing into an adult in society, I didn't have any hope of that either.
And you can hear the negativity of your self-talk back then, right? I mean, you were just building walls everywhere you looked. You were creating a scenario in which there was no hope. What saved you from this moment here? I mean,
So when I moved back home, my grandmother had tried to get me to go to this Christian counselor, and I went for about a month or so. So I saw her probably 4, 5, or 6 times, something like that. Within the second time, she diagnosed me clinically depressed. I've later come to understand more of my struggle as PTSD and bipolar from all the trauma in my life early on. But at the time, again, I'm 20, 21 years old at that point, just entering into this phase of trying to figure all this out. So I'm get diagnosed depressed, put on antidepressants, and several weeks in, this counselor tells me that I need to quit going to Catholic church. And I don't think she was anti-Catholic. I think she's listening to my story going, you've been doing this for 15 months.
And it's not working. It
might be time for you to try something else. I think that was more I want to be clear to the audience in case this isn't like an anti-Catholic thing. This was just where I was and what I was getting counsel. Well, I rejected her counsel. And I told my grandmother on the way home that day that this lady didn't know what she was talking about and that I wasn't going to go back and see her anymore. And I remember I saw her on Wednesdays very clearly because of the progress of what happened next. So I had one friend, her name was Michelle Stokes, and she was the only friend in Gulfport that I was allowing myself to hang out with at the time because she had actually matured on from a bunch of the high school stuff. She was on a career path, and she was a positive and someone that I was just had a very, very good relationship with from, almost middle school.
Are you still using at this point?
At this point, no.
Okay.
Yeah.
How did that come about? How did you manage to
so Michelle, I was at Michelle's, and this was 23 years ago now.
Yeah.
So I was at Michelle's house, just hanging out the next afternoon on a Thursday. And while I was there, her brother Casey had called Michelle, didn't even know I was there, and invited Michelle to go the next night on a Friday night to Brownsville Assembly of God in Pensacola, Florida for this guest speaker thing. Everybody always asked me, was that the revivals? No, this wasn't the revivals. It was the same church, but well after that. But so we were just going for a guest speaker thing, or they were. And when Michelle hung up the phone and told me about it and who all was going to be going, I was like, well, actually, I could use some of these people in my life. I didn't know what I was getting into. And when we went into that service and I was sitting on that pew with 8 of my old friends from high school back in my life, they were all on good paths. And I knew where they were in life, and God had brought me here with them. I knew in that moment that God was saving me.
Oh, wow. Yes.
That he was making a way out. And it's funny looking back, ironically, this is what the counselor was telling me to do. I don't know if y'all caught that.
Yes.
Because I didn't make the correlation.
Yeah.
But thinking back, that God was speaking through her, and he wasn't going to have me not pursue that. And so he had to just make a way for me that I could be comfortable with it.
Yes.
Right. And so I remember it was a very charismatic type thing. And we came out and went to dinner, and Casey he's like, man, I hope that didn't scare you. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, well, they were doing I don't know if y'all ever been to a charismatic service, but at the end of the service, they lay hands and everybody falls out and acts weird and all that.
I've been to Brownsville.
Or at least from the outside looking in.
Yeah.
So that was all happening. I was like, dude, I don't know what happened with all that, man. I know what God's doing in my life, and I really don't remember even what the guy spoke on.
Well, you were in your own conversation with God.
Exactly. Yeah. And it all happened before the sermon even started. This happened for me during the music portion of the service, and just tears and it was done. Oh, wow. They could have preached anything they wanted to at that point. It had nothing to do with it. And so anyway, that started a long relationship with me and Casey that just fueled for the next several years. And Casey was incremental in my life. He was single at the time. I was single at the time. We moved in together, and man, I was just the word. Once I understood the gospel, that was it for me. Once I understood, the Bible just opened wide open. And I've been devouring the word every year since then. And but those first 3 years were critical. Like I went through the New Testament in like 3 weeks, and I was just hungry. God restored me. That doesn't mean there weren't challenges.
Sure.
But for where I was depressed and contemplating suicide, to throw in my antidepressants in the garbage, which I later found out also was just a temporary manic episode, right, from getting saved, from experiencing this. This is a new euphoria. Yeah. But I did throw my antidepressants in the garbage, and I had quit tobacco for the first time. And as many years I've been trying, I was able to lay tobacco down. And then, of course, there were some things that obviously the Lord had to still work, and things there He is still working out.
Right. Amen.
Because that's a process that we'll all be in for the rest of our life. So,
that's right.
But there was major life change from hopelessness and depression and suicide to life and purpose and will to live.
That you can really see the turnaround that night.
It was tangible.
In that service.
It was tangible for
I think
me.
if you walk in someplace, though, and you don't, I don't hear enough of it, like utter hopelessness. Really, you've got one lifeline, and to be flooded with hope, that's powerful.
Yeah. And I had Casey there. I mean, he was a predominant role for me.
Yeah.
Just helping me to understand how to approach the word. And I mean, we would just, in the mornings, we're single guys,
Yeah.
So in the mornings, we'd wake up and do scripture flashcards for having cereal or breakfast.
Oh,
and,
that's cool.
Then we'd pray and intercede and do all this stuff during our free time. And we'd go to the gym and come home from the gym and, go through the books of the Bible, where it's just like literally like, just learning the Old Testament books and the New Testament books. We sit there, okay, you go. Or Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, Romans, you know what I'm saying? And it was just learning and just devouring everything about the scripture and the word. So it was just a high growth pattern for me. And that's what ended up projecting me into my bachelor's in psychology. And and then I met my wife, who is now my wife. I met her at the church we were going to at the time, and we were both set to graduate the same year. We both graduated May of 2005, and we got married that end of that May. So the Lord he restored.
Yeah.
Before we go any further, let's take a minute to address the man or the woman listening to today's episode and wishing for a better life. Or maybe addiction has completely overtaken a family member or a friend.
You are not alone. As you may know, the Jesus Loves Addicts podcast is produced by the Home of Grace, a Christ-centered addiction recovery program in South Mississippi with over 60 years of experience.
The Home of Grace has residential programs ranging from 30 days to 12 months. With 2 separate campuses for men and women, they are fully staffed with caring individuals who want nothing more than to guide you to a life of recovery.
Services include individual and group counseling, marriage and family counseling, classes, workshops, GED, and workforce training, all grounded in biblical principles.
And because of donations from the community, the cost of the program is incredibly affordable.
Thousands of alumni from all across the country can tell you there is no other program in the world quite like the Home of Grace.
If you want to start a new path to recovery, don't wait. Speak with their admissions specialist today. Visit homeofgrace.org or call 833-55-GRACE to talk with someone.
That's 833-55-GRACE. Call the Home of Grace today. You know, it's funny, as you discuss this, I can imagine somebody out there listening and going, oh, great, he became a holy roller. And it's interesting to me that when people become on fire for the Lord, that the outside looking in tends to be a more derogatory look at it. But honestly, it's no different than somebody in high school or college suddenly getting the passion to play a sport, and suddenly they're every day at the gym, and every day, they're buying magazines about that sport. They're studying the history of it. Nobody looks at that and goes, "Oh Lord, they're going off the rails." You did what everybody does when they become passionate about something, and the reality is, what better thing to become passionate about than the Creator of all things, right? So I love that, and it just dawned on me that I know somebody out there is kind of shaking their head going, that's not for me. But my question to them would be, what are you passionate about? I'll bet you understand it. If you can look at something you're passionate about and how you got into that, this makes sense. Right. Mm-hmm. So I love that. I mean, it's what we're, I believe, called to is that kind of passion. Yeah. And now my understanding is you are helping others find that passion. Is that right? What do you do a lot today?
I mean, that's really been my calling from the beginning. I started learning about evangelism and intercession and, all of that. And just at those fundamental levels for me, that's what was emphasized back in that time as discipleship, following, learning how to follow Christ in your everyday life. And somehow, some way over time, things just lost focus from an institutional standpoint, and it became a great challenge. And also, I think too, a lot of the components about you asked early on about how all that affected me, right? The trauma, the loss, and I think a lot of that was swept under the rug where I was.
Sure.
And, it was kind of this mentality, and this is more of a church history issue, not to point out a particular issue of a church I was going to or anything like that. This was just the nature of where the church was in that point in history, right? It's kind of the name it and claim it, word of faith, prosperity. You don't talk about having a mental disorder, because if you talk about it, you're speaking death over yourself, right? And so, but the problem with that is when you get into the dynamics of a marriage, you know what I mean?
You got to talk about it.
And you sweep it under the rug, and your spouse just endures the brunt of it because you're not dealing with it, you're not acknowledging it,
right?
You know what I mean? So you're not working on it. And if you acknowledge it, you know what I mean, then you have a problem with your faith.
That's right.
The Lord didn't heal you, and that's kind of what I was brought up in. And so, that combined with slowly moving away from like discipleship and what it means to follow Jesus in your everyday life, eventually started putting so much strain on my marriage. And I just had no leadership left in my life.
Yeah.
I was floating all on my own, and I don't know if this is really relevant. It's a powerful part of my story.
Yeah.
I just don't know how deep we want to get into some of that, but it was a powerful point of healing and deliverance for me going through that. And also me and my wife working our way out of the institutional side of things and learning the simplicity again of our faith. Amen. And letting Jesus and our hearing his voice and following him, and not necessarily cutting to the mold of man's ways of doing things, I call it religion. Yeah. But it was a big battle in my life and really surfaced a lot of my depression again. Yeah. For a long season.
Well, because the dishonesty of the way I think, and listen, many well-intentioned, truly Christian people live subtly dishonest lives. And I think even that's well-intentioned, right? I think much of the church, this is just my 2 cents, but I think much of the church takes on an advertising kind of a mentality. In other words, if I'm going to claim to be Christian, I must appear to be perfect then, because I don't want anybody to see me as imperfect or unpresent. That's not it. That, guys, if you're doing
there's no
that,
vulnerability with that.
Correct. And you're not advertising
there's no humility.
Christ. You're advertising self-will and ultimately all the pain that you're hiding under that, right? The way people truly see Christ is through honest living. And some of that's going to hurt. Some of that's going to be joyful. Some of that's, we're going to be all over the map, right? But it is the truth that sets you free. It's not the disguise. It's not the mask. It's not any of that. It's the truth that sets you free. Yeah. And so I love where you're going. That's a passion of mine, right? Is to see the church become real and tangible for everybody, because it should be. Christ was tangible for everybody, right? He didn't come down and pretend to be anything he wasn't, and he made himself accessible to all. And sometimes the church doesn't do that, right? And that's why, maybe rightfully so, and I'll get off my soapbox here, but maybe rightfully so, you know, the term hypocrite is thrown around a lot, and that's unfortunate, and I'm guilty of it at times, right? So just an admonition to just, you know, I hope everybody really hears your heart in that, right? To just be, man, we've got to live honest lives and let Christ show Christ. We're never going to show him as well as he can, right? Mm-hmm.
Most of the time I'm showing him it's through my humility and repentance from something dumb I've done, Amen. Right? So it's the humility and repentance side that ends up showing him, not my ability to be something or not be something in the first place.
Yeah. Warren, man, what a wonderful story. You know, there's so many different paths out of the pain that life throws at us, right? Sometimes those paths are hard and gritty and, you know, verging unbearable. I stress verging because they are bearable with Christ. In your story, there was some of that, and then deliverance, right? Mm-hmm. Not everybody's delivered that way, but I love that because we need to see that too, right? God, like us, he's not bound by any singular method of saving people. And so I love your story, love your vulnerability. I just, again, want to encourage anybody out there, if you're in that pain, you know, here's yet another story where somebody was at the end of their rope. You know, how many times have we heard somebody talk about feeling suicidal? And
I do have one thing.
Yes.
Well, when we're listening to your story, you know, your bottom didn't sound like some of the bottoms we've heard. And something that's just come up recently, I just want to remind people, your bottom will not always look like everybody else's. And your bottom can stop at a DUI. Your bottom can stop before you lose everything. You know, don't compare it to someone else's, and don't let that be, how to say, basically like, I don't need to reach out yet because I haven't gotten that bad. I'm not that bad, or this didn't happen to me. It doesn't matter. If you feel an urge to reach out to someone, then that's what you need to do.
Oh. Yeah, amen. And, you know, I think that's one of the purposes of this podcast, Jesus Loves Addicts, that you can hear stories. And, you know, we hope and pray that somebody out there hears them. And because you recognize you're at the beginning of this journey, you don't have to take it to the end. Yes. Right? You don't have to get there. You can learn from what you're hearing and reach out and get help. Help is there. So please reach out. And so I just want to say again, thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Warren, for your vulnerability and your honest story. Guys, JesusLovesAddicts.com. You can leave us comments there. You can ask questions there. You can leave your own testimony there. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time.